Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Lisa, and I will be your host for today. The webinar will be recorded and include a 10 to 15-minute live Q&A session at the end. We'll aim to finish by 2 p.m. as indicated. For those of you joining us for the first time, a very warm welcome to you. And for those of you who are regulars, it's good to have you back. We hope you will find today's session very interesting and insightful. On to today's session, we're always keen to understand what is the most relevant content that can help you achieve more digitally. And one of the recurring suggestions that we received from many of you was having a webinar on CRM, that is Constituent Relationship Management Software. It can be perceived sometimes as a complex topic. There are many functionalities and user requirements for different parts of your organizations, but the potential is huge. According to UK fundraising survey, many charities using CRM enjoy donor contribution growth of at least 20%. And another survey said that 82% of charities that were using a CRM software agree that it was saving them time and income in the long run. So obviously, that's why we are here today, joined by our friends from Superhighways, Kate White and Alice Linell. They will offer some advice and guidance about choosing the best CRM for your charity. They will cover the basics of the CRM software, the types of data you can manage, the processes you need to implement, and how to optimize your CRM. So before I hand over to Alice and Kate, a few house rules. We are all joining remotely, so we may have some connection issues, although we've done some due diligence, so it shouldn't happen. If it is happening at any point, just to let us know, and we'll do our best to be back online quickly. You can submit your questions at any time during the presentation just by clicking on the Q&A button. It's two little speech bubbles overlapping one another. You can also vote for your favorite questions by clicking on the thumb emoji. We'll do our very best to answer all the questions, and the maximum of them by 2 p.m. There'll also be some polls that Alice and Kate will run over past you. And as always, we love to hear what you think. So please use the chat function to share where you're joining us from, your comments, your experience using CRM, anything you think that will help us all, as it's great to learn from one another. We will send an email within the next 10 days with the recording of this session and additional resources. Everything will be hosted on the events tab, events section of our website. So please check this back in approximately a week's time. So everything is recorded, don't worry. And please ask questions. So that's enough from me. Let me extend a warm welcome to Kate and Alice, and over to you.
Thank you, Lisa. Hi, everyone. I'm Kate from Superhighways, and I'll be co-running this session with my colleague Alice. Superhighways supports small charities in London do more with digital and data, and helping organisations choose CRMs or databases has been a large part of our work over a number of years. And in the last year, we've done some focus work under our DataWise London programme, so really doing lots of research and coming up with our recommended process. So we're going to share some of that with you today. We've got a lot that we're trying to cover in this kind of 45 minute presentation. Then we've got the time for questions afterwards, as Lisa mentioned. But really, we're kind of taking a step back, kind of looking at the bigger picture, what and why you need a system, what data you need to collect and store in it. Then we're going to spend most of the time looking at a process that we recommend organisations go through. Part of that will be focusing on your data culture, how you're bringing everybody on board within your organisation, how you define your requirements. We'll have a quick look at different options, and then choosing a system is only part of it. It's then about how you kind of embed that system on an ongoing basis. So yeah, more about the process, less about the product. I'm sorry, we can't tell you which CRM to choose, but yeah, hopefully you'll learn a lot today that you can take back to your organisation and help you with that process. We'll also feature some practical resources that we've developed, and there'll be a link in the slide towards the end where you'll be able to access those and download and use them if you think they'll be useful. So yeah, it's quite unusual for us to run a webinar. Normally we're running interactive training. So we did ask Charity Digital if we could add in a couple of polls at the beginning, just to get a sense really for who's in the space today and what systems you're currently using. So I think Zoe's going to launch a poll, and we're just going to ask you to tick off what you're currently using. There we go. You should see that on your screen now. Give you a few seconds to complete. And I'll share back the answers in a second. Okay, so I can see the results from the polls. So spreadsheets is the winner. 78% of you using spreadsheets. That's no surprise to us. Then the next most popular is a kind of plethora of other online tools. So MailChimp, Eventbrite, we're probably all using some of those kind of leading products for various functions. Online forms and surveys is next. Much fewer of you have either got one main database or a collection of databases. So that's great to see who's in the room. And I think what we're going to present will be really helpful. Still a few people using pen and paper. So Zoe, do you want to, let me close that. So we've got a second question, and that's really to find out what are your main challenges for implementing a database. So again, that should be up on your screen now. So we've asked you for your 3 biggest challenges. Give you a few more seconds, and I think Zoe will close the poll. Okay, so I can see the results now. So the most common challenge there is difficult to understand what different systems actually offer. And again, I think that's something Alice and I've been doing lots of research along with another colleague, and I think that's what's been taking a bit of time to really understand what all the systems do offer. It's not easy to find out, for example, on necessarily just via a website. You really need to delve a little bit deeper. Not sure what we need is the next one, and then lack of clarity on the true cost. So we'll share these results actually, so you can see challenges and what other systems other people are using as part of the session resources. Great. Well, thank you for completing. Just before we move on to our process, we just wanted to clarify what we mean by CRM or database. We kind of use that language interchangeably. And interestingly, Lisa, and I was going to say the C in CRM is quite often, there are different words that are used in that space. So we've mentioned customer relationship management. I think Lisa mentioned constituents. So really, it's a system, and the customers bit or the constituents can refer to all different kinds of people. So this will depend very much on your charity, its setup, what are the priorities. You might have members, donors, volunteers, partners, people that you support. And in our work, we may need focusing on a kind of a tighter focus and looking at systems that organisations can use to collect and analyse data about their service users, how they engage and the impact of that. So we're going to be looking at CRM and database systems through that lens throughout today, but I think the process is applicable across whatever your main priority is. So I think Alice is going to talk us through.
Lovely, thanks, Kate. So we recognise how daunting the whole system was of trying to find a new system. It's that sort of question of where to start, where do I look, what do things do? It becomes incredibly complicated as a process. And people often just get stalled into inactivity by not knowing where to start with it. So at Superhighways, because we help people a lot finding databases, helping them get them implemented, we kind of had a handle on what was the right process to follow, and we decided to turn our process into a process that you would be able to use yourself and to be able to follow through. And in order to back up that process, we've developed a toolkit of templates that run alongside it that you can use in your organisation. So it's a kind of do-it-yourself consultancy package in a way. So if you follow the green line along the top, you'll see that that's our 7-step process. So we're going to delve further into each step, but just for the overview now, it's the process we follow is called scope. So it's kind of looking at the bigger picture, planning it, how we're going to approach it, specify. So it's actually sort of documenting what do we need, then the selecting bit of actually choosing a database. Then you're into kind of the preparation of how do we actually go about getting this database implemented. And then you're into test and training, getting everyone familiar with the system, making sure it works, it does what it says it should, and then into implementing it. And you can see if you look at the blue bar going across the top, that's the kind of rough thing you should be looking at in terms of how this process is going to be divided up in terms of time. So people tend, by nature, I do it too, to jump to step 4 and to start looking at solutions before they've done steps 1 to 3. But our suggestion is kind of take a step back from that and do your proper kind of planning, thinking what you need before you actually start diving in and looking at things. Because as that 78% of all of you saying, who knows which system does what, it makes it even harder if you don't actually know what you need when you start that journey. So this is our overview of our process, and Kate and I are going to go through now, and we'll go through steps 1 to 7, and we'll look at each one individually and kind of what's involved in that step. In terms of the templates, the kind of toolkit that sits alongside it and this process, it's all available to you, so you can pick up and use any of the templates or tools involved with it, and you'll get a link. So the first place we start is scope. So before you do anything, I mean, you'll obviously have an inkling you need a new system, that's why you're attending this. The first thing to do though is to really sort of take stock of where you are and you'll to kind of gauge your starting point. So obviously time and budget are really important. And when we say time, we don't just mean time in terms of how long is it going to take? I mean, obviously that's important too, but also time. Do people have time in the organisation to actually devote to this as a project? It's a lot of work to get a new system in place. So you need people to kind of be able to commit some sort of time to it, and not just the person running the project, but everybody in the organisation. Then we've got attitude towards change. Lots of you will know that it can be hard to change people's way of working, especially if they're used to pen and paper or spreadsheets or something. It's hard to make that move into something digital, especially if you're working with volunteers who maybe aren't so tech savvy. There's challenges. And so sort of working out how to deal with that and recognizing that it might be an issue is really important, so that you can tackle it and take everybody on that journey with you. Technical skills, you need to be auditing. Where are we at? We see people all the time with systems they put in new systems that are all singing, all dancing, fantastic systems, but nobody in the organization can actually use them properly. So people start cheating and start using spreadsheets or reverting to pen and paper. So, kind of gauge where people are at. Don't give them something that they'll find too difficult to use. And if they need, obviously training needs to be thought about as that. If you've got people with weaker technical skills, you're going to need to devote more time to training. Then we've got data stakeholders. Now, everybody always thinks about the users. Often they'll think about reporting needs for systems, but you need to kind of think about this in a bigger picture, because it's not only you and your staff and maybe your trustees who will be impacted by this, but it's also your clients and service users, your volunteers, your partners who you work with, maybe the local authorities or the NHS or whoever else you might be working alongside. And you need to be actually focusing on what their requirements are too, and making sure you're not missing them. And then we've got software and equipment audit. So you need to look around and see what you've already got. You need to be looking at, have you got, are all your computers up to spec to manage a new system? Do you have the infrastructure for, do you have broadband? Do you have mobile access if people need to access it remotely? And what kind of bits of software are you using? And also in terms of the sort of software and equipment audit, where's your data currently? That's really important to be mapping that out and seeing where it's all sitting. And then the last thing on this scope is an outcome and evaluation framework. So if you are putting in a new system and you're going to be keeping data in there, you need to be making sure that it's going to be linking up to whatever your outcome and evaluation framework is. And if you haven't got one of those, to be thinking about having a look at putting one together for your organisation. They can be incredibly simple. You can just have one outcome and one evaluation gauge for that, sort of performance indicator of how you're doing, but you need to be thinking about those as you move forward. So I mentioned about kind of mapping data stakeholders and thinking about other people. So this is an example of one of the templates we have. The template's blank, obviously, but this is what we've mapped out for an organisation we're working with, and just thinking through who is going to be using the system. So you can see here, we've mapped out the people we need to be thinking about when we're looking at the new system. For this particular organisation, is we need to think about the staff, and we put in the different staff teams. We've got the volunteers and the different sorts of volunteers involved, the trustees, beneficiaries of the charity, the donors as well, and those are broken down for this charity into kind of the different sorts of donors they've got. So they've got, casual givers and legacy givers and individual donors and all these kind of different sorts, all of whom have different requirements in terms of how they interact with the system you might put in, or take data away out of it. You've got funders in this instance, could be local authority, could be a corporate funder, could be a community foundation. And then you've got partners who you work with as well. So for this particular charity, it was with libraries and local colleges and local charities and religious groups. So you've got a huge array, as you can see, of people you need to be thinking about. So when you're planning your requirements, you should be making sure that you are ticking off that whoever you get put onto your stakeholder data, your data stakeholder mapping template, you should be ticking them off. And as you go through your requirements, say, yes, okay, we've done staff now. Yes, that's taking care of all the volunteers, all the different types, and really kind of making sure that you've covered all of those off, because otherwise you'll turn around, suddenly someone will say, but for the donor website, we need, these sorts of bits of information, and you won't be able to provide them because you haven't factored that in. After you've kind of done that mapping, I talked earlier about sort of mapping what you've currently got. So we have a systems audit template, and it's a bit tiny, the print on this, but hopefully you can see to give an idea. It's basically it's just a way of documenting everything you've currently got. So if you look in the left-hand column, you can see you've got system names. So this is actually what our audit. So we've got something called help desk. You put in the application that it's in. So if you scan down, you'll see there's a database package in there, but there's a 365 form, and we have an Excel spreadsheet as well. Then you put a description of what it's used for, who's using it, are you reporting from this system, and one of the most important columns in there is what are the risks and benefits of this. Like, people tend to be embarrassed when they talk to us about using paper or Excel, but actually there are lots of benefits as well as systems. So you need to weigh up. You don't need to digitalize everything. You need to digitalize where things could be run more efficiently. So those risks and benefits are really important to capture. The challenges and issues, by that we sort of noting the challenges and these issues of the system. By that we mean kind of really thinking about where are the potholes with using it, where are we getting stuck, where are we being inefficient or having gaps. And then the last column is kind of what would make the use of this tool more effective. So it's trying to think about, in an ideal world, how would this work better? And often as you go through this process, you realise that actually quite a few of the things you do will be quite good actually, and you don't need to make lots of changes, or they could be quite cosmetic changes. Sometimes people think they need to completely change everything, but you don't necessarily have to. You might find you need to put a database in for one bit, but the other bits can stand as they are because actually they're good enough as they are. And then, oh, this slide's got a bit funny, hasn't it? I talked about an outcomes and evaluation framework. So, sorry, it's got a bit funny, this slide, but this is an example of one of these, and it's for an armed forces charity. So you can see here we've got, well, I don't know if you can see, it's hard to read, but the first column, it's an outcome column. So for this charity, they've got 2 outcomes they're hoping to achieve. They're hoping to achieve an increased sense of feeling valued amongst their beneficiaries, and they're hoping to that its beneficiaries will be better able to cope with the experiences and trauma of adjusting to civilian life. So in the next column over, they put their activity, what they do, so where they'll get the data from, if you're thinking in your database hat on. So they run kind of veteran events and holidays with partners and outings and events. And then they put in the indicator of how do you know what outcome you've achieved. And so for instance, at the top, we've got it's the number of people report a high feeling of self-value, number of thank you letters they're getting, mentoring self-value. And an interesting one in there is they've got posture. So, and for instance, when they're looking at photographs of things, that people seem to be standing straighter and taller and feeling more kind of confident and happy in themselves. Number of people reporting being better able to cope, and those kind of indicators. So I could go on and on, there's loads of them. But you get the idea of, you kind of fix on what your end goal is, and then what your activity you're doing in order to try and get towards that end goal, and how you're going to measure how you're doing that. And then you'll see the last 3 columns are blank because we're going to come on to them later as we move along through the process. But getting that first 3 columns filled in, getting your high level kind of goals and aims for your charity documented, and thinking of those indicators is really crucial to this process as well. Hand over to you,
Alice.
Kate, for this one.
So the second step we're calling plan. So how are we going to approach the project? So this is a quicker one, but it's really important to appoint somebody to lead on this project going forward. As Alice has mentioned, it's not about this being just implemented by one person. It's so important to involve the whole team, but you still need somebody to drive it forward. And at this point as well, start thinking about that timeline. Alice mentioned it does take time. We've just come out of a consultancy project with an organisation, I think probably 3 months from initial workshops to kind of, or maybe around about 2 months, Alice, wasn't it, for workshops across the team, defining requirements and then choosing a system. Sorry, Alice, I thought you were going to confirm.
No, sorry, my internet's going. Well, I just got a message saying your internet's unstable. Sorry, Kate. Yes, it did take us that long, so I think I've got a delay on me.
So build-in time. Don't think that we also do get requests from people saying, especially at this time of year coming up to the end of March, we need to implement a new system to be up and running by April, and often we're pushing back and saying that just isn't realistic. You'll rush it and you'll go for the wrong thing. So it's kind of looking at what time people have and being realistic about that. So yeah, we can't stress enough the staff and volunteer buy-in. So really involving people right from the beginning. Alice showed those templates. What we normally suggest is that you're filling those in as a team. You're getting everybody involved in identifying those data stakeholders, identifying where all the data is. You're unless you do that, you'll be missing out data. There'll be a few sneaky spreadsheets somewhere that somebody set up that other people weren't aware of. So yeah, and getting people to also voice any apprehensions. So again, you can address those as you move forward. So what is it, what are people concerned about? Where have they had bad experiences in the past, or they're just not interested? Really kind of exploring that, and kind of creating an environment where it's okay for people to share that, because that's going to be so much better in terms of showing that you're addressing that, and kind of almost building and identifying something for the that addresses that, rather than focusing on the people that get it and will be able to move forward with it. So co-production, really, yeah, involving everybody at different levels within the organization, and we definitely recommend that to include trustees and volunteers.
So after you've got that kind of planned out and put your project plan in place, the next step, the big step, is the specifying, and it's working out what you really need the system to do. So we put a big user requirements there at the top, but we've kind of broken it down into 4 steps. User requirements are basically a process of you kind of sketching out who needs what in terms of data, how do they need to access it, and what are they using it for. And that sounds really straightforward, doesn't it? But actually it's quite hard to kind of get all of alone to be able to figure that out for an organization. And so the idea behind it is to kind of go out and find all of that from the staff, from your volunteers, from your trustees, from your service users. They're also involved and should be consulted on these things. And so we put together some templates, which we're going to move on to in a second, called user profiles and user stories, which are quite well known. If you Google them, you'll see there's 1,000 examples out there of them. But they're a really good way of being able to kind of capture what people need in a kind of normal human kind of way of talking about things, rather than in a functional requirements specification or something. Also under user requirements, an important thing to do is we've talked about that kind of documenting what you've got, the Excel spreadsheets, the databases, who's using what, where and why. But it's also important to kind of map that out as well, and map out how data needs to flow between the organisation. So you can do that kind of just visually with a piece of paper and a pen. There are lots of softwares to help you do it as well. But it's really just a case of trying to work out, well, if your piece of information comes in, name and address comes in here when they first telephone, and then it would go on to the the team that helps them in the first instance, and then it would go to another team, and kind of actually working out how is that information and data going to flow through your organisation, who needs to be touching what and when. Oh, sorry, Kate, that one. Thank you. And then as well with user requirements, it's really tempting to put down everything that you want in a system, and of course nothing has anything. So again, as a team, it's worth going through and just working out what's essential to you as an organisation, what is a desirable kind of would like to have but isn't a deal breaker, and what could we be doing a different way. So not everything has to go into one all singing all dancing database. It's fine to have a variety of solutions in place. And then data protection by design and default. So by that we mean kind of this idea of thinking about data protection from the outset when you're designing, to make sure that your data protection is built in from the beginning and through the whole process. So it's kind of, they always talk about it being baked in, don't they, to systems. And then map data to the outcomes. So if you've got your outcome framework, you kind of said what you want to achieve and what your indicators are, how are you going to pull together that data to map to those outcomes which you find? let's go and have a look at some of the templates that we use to be able to do this journey. This is a slightly daunting slide with too much text on it for this length of time session. But this is an example of a user persona. It's a good idea to get everybody in your organization to do one, or at least one person who, sorry, my phone off, at least one person who does each sort of job, although it's always fascinating to have the same person with the same job title if you've got multiple of them filling out these out, because they're always different. But the idea is that everybody fills one out, and they fill out on them what the goal of their job is, you know, kind of high level, what their end goal is. So in this instance, it's a trainer who said her outcome she's trying to achieve, the goal is to equip young people with knowledge and skills and contacts they need to get a job. And then you get people to list all the activities that they do. Again, high level, not like, you know, walk to the photocopier and do whatever, but, you know, kind of, so she's got link young people up with mentors to help them on their journey, deliver skills training to young people, and to make sure young people are aware of the opportunities out there. So she's got kind of 3 core things she's trying to achieve. I'm sure she does loads of other things as well, but these are her kind of core things she's trying to achieve in her job. And then you get people to just sort of explain how they're going to be using it. So in the instance of Sarah, our trainer, she's office-based, but she runs skills in community centres across the borough, and she uses her own personal laptop for external training sessions. So the reason behind asking to use this practice is you're going to need to find something that tailors to her, and which we'll see in a second when we look at pulling these out. And then you go on to frustrations, pain points, and how they feel about it all. And this is really important, because you might find that people are very frustrated by something that's very easy to fix and maybe doesn't even require a huge, you know, all singing, dancing database for it. So in this instance of Sarah, it's her frustration is she's got no online database of training material, so before she goes out, she has to do a lot of prep, and she's reliant on Wi-Fi and training centres to get online. She's aware that the current paper-based system is wasting a lot of time, and she's using her own laptop, and shouldn't be, but is downloading client data. Then it's on to user stories. So this is a different way of capturing information, and these could be a good way of getting people to kind of really define what they need a system to do. So the user persona, which we just looked at with Sarah, was defining kind of who she is, what she needs to get done in her job, and this is kind of coming down another level into it. So a user story is basically made up of a 3-part statements. So you start with as a type of user, and then you say who you're building the system for. Who is the user? And then it has a I want statement. So it's like asking, well, what do you want? What are we building? What's the purpose of it? And then you have a so that statement, which is a reason for why you want what you're saying you want. So why are we building it? What's the value to the user? So there's an example down here below, which makes it a bit clearer. So we've got as a support worker who organises food bank deliveries, I want to be able to produce a list of beneficiaries and the requirements for each ward in the borough, so that I can know what and how much is needed for each ward to prepare parcels and map the addresses for delivery drivers. So it's very kind of clean sort of statementing of what their needs are. And then we've got a couple more here, or 3 more here. I won't read them all. I'll let you have a look as well, but there are 3 sort of standard statements. So first one is as an administrator, I need to know whether a space is on upcoming heritage walks so that I can respond to inquiries and accept referrals. If you just take a second and read the next 2, it's pretty easier than me reading them out. Oh, okay. Having done that kind of Sarah exercise of getting her to put her user persona together with her goals and her usage practices, and her statements, her user stories as well, we're able to then start pulling together requirements. So in this instance of this charity, we've highlighted where some of the key issues for her. So around usage practices, about using her own laptop, about having no online database. And you'll see the different colours. We've then picked up the issues that we're finding and we've pulled them into a user requirement document. So the colours that we had on that slide, which were yellow was all her kind of online access issues, for instance, is we can see here we've got them as the what, so the functional requirement. So the what here, she needs online access to training materials. The why is to ensure the trainer has the latest version of the training material with them when training externally. Who the stakeholder is, so coming back to that data stakeholder. And then here's columns where you'll specify, is this essential? Is it desirable? Or is it something where we can leave where it is and link it in? And then an alternative solution column. So for instance, we've said with this one to online access to training materials, it would be really desirable if she could have online access to them via a database. But on the other hand, there is an alternative solution. We could put them onto our website or onto a shared online drive somewhere else and have her access it via that. We don't need the database necessarily to solve this problem. But the next one of the secure online access to check off training session attendance, that is essential. We don't have another alternative for that. So we've gauged that as essential. When you produce this list of user requirements, this is something you can then send to, if you're starting to then look at database packages, this is something you can send to them and say, here's our requirements, can you meet them? And they can go down for you, and you can put in a column for them saying, do you meet these? And they can go down for you and tick off what they can and can't provide you. And then that reverses the process. Instead of you going to them and trying to figure out what on earth it is they offer, you're turning the tables on them and you're saying, this is what we need, can you do it? And it's a massive time saver when dealing with third-party suppliers, vendors. And then the last one, so this bit of specify is coming back to this measurement framework. So do you remember we had the first 3 columns filled in at an earlier stage of what the outcome is, what the activities are that help us get to that outcome, what are the indicators, how do we know that we're getting there? And now at this stage, we're beginning to fill in, well, how do we get the data? Where's the information coming from? So you can see from here, they've just gone down and just specified what they're coming from. So it's some things are coming from a sign-up form, some things are coming from letters. The posture example is coming from observation. And then they're putting in when and by whom, who's collecting this data. So it's just, they're collecting it at, well, at events, but they've got the office admin, they've got an event organizer. So they're just specifying when, who's collecting it in that data. And then they've got the reporting. How are we going to report on it? And so it's just, this whole process is just a way of being able to kind of sort of streamline your process of how you're getting from something happening and through the kind of recording of it and out the other end, you're using what you've recorded to be able to show that you are having the impact you want to be having in the work you're doing. All of these really help when it comes to choosing a system. I think you're doing this one, Kate.
Yes, I'm going to move on and just kind of take you quickly through these next slides. So we talked about systems audit. There's another piece of work that you can do is actually to start kind of mapping those systems. So the existing ones, this is just an example of where we came in to do some consultancy. It's a good example that shows that how things evolve in an organization when it's not joined up. So this example was finding out that and also where different providers know different systems. I think in this example, their web developer knew Civi CRM very well, and so had attached that for training bookings, but obviously somewhere else in the organization was already using Salesforce. So just mapping those systems is a really good something to do in terms of what you've got, but also then when you're starting to look at making your choices and how a new system will fit with other existing ones that you might still need to keep. We've also recommended that you think about mapping your working processes, because this might be a good opportunity to make some changes. So don't be looking for a system that fits how you work. It's maybe just taking a step back and challenging, are we working in the right way? Are there bottlenecks? So we've added quite a few things on this slide that we come up against quite a lot. Obviously, yeah, thinking what's changed over the last year as well in terms of the pandemic. Are things going to change going forwards in terms of how you work? So yeah, not forgetting to do that, and you can do that very roughly. So this is just a screenshot of a workshop that we ran with I think 5 people from one organisation, just looking at their registration process. So we haven't, this is the kind of version 1. This was kind of getting everybody involved and collecting that information about what happens when somebody registers. We've given you a few options there for different software that you can use. Some will have kind of inbuilt process templates that you can use. So Miro, Lucidchart or Draw are ones you could have a look at. The other thing we mentioned about was maybe sometimes looking at where you're using other systems. Are there opportunities to join things up? So many of the kind of mainstream systems will have what are called APIs already, which enable you to connect up. So MailChimp and SurveyMonkey and Eventbrite and Zoom, for example. There are other ones that we've got on the slide, Power BI and Data Studio, that you might be able to integrate with something that you're using in terms of reporting and creating dashboards. So in that column on the system audit and the user requirements was a space there to kind of leave something alone if it's working fine as it is, or to explore just making some other change. You can also create your own. So if there aren't existing links or APIs, then there are some third-party software, so Zapier and If This Then That, and then some of you might be using Office 365. There's Power Automate. You might be able to automate or link up some processes. So don't forget kind of looking at this whilst you're considering what you need your a CRM or database to do. I'm going to hand back to Alice. We don't have, we've got about 5 minutes, Alice.
Oh, fantastic. So then in terms of selecting which system you should use, obviously the first thing to do is go and have a look what's out there. Get your user requirements up, and as I said, send them through to vendors and ask them if they meet your requirements, rather than spending loads of time yourself on websites trying to sort them out. That's a really good kind of workaround for time saving. The costing is a real problem, and everybody always asks us about cost and budget. You need to really get to the bottom of what the real cost of a system is. There are free systems out there, and lots of people get very tempted into free systems, but you need to think about sort of setup costs and oh, thanks, Kate. You need to think about setup costs, customization. Does it need customization? How are you going to train people? Are there ongoing support costs? So you need to be really, really digging into the costing of it. Free is never really free, unfortunately. So that's worth thinking about. I've seen a couple of questions in chat about free, but so we can come to that in Q&A. Talking to other people is the best way to find out what's good and what's out there. Getting out there, getting people to demo their own systems to you. You know, they might love them, but actually when you see them working, you might think, crikey, how are they working with something so old and clunky looking? Or you might love it, but it's definitely worth talking. And then mapping your new database and how it will fit in with your current systems. You need to really think about, what do I need to be linking up to what? And is this going to allow it? The new systems do allow things to integrate very easily. The older systems less so, but sometimes their interface is easier to deal with. So it's just kind of thinking about the bigger picture beyond this one database. And this is a huge slide, which I'm not going to go through, but basically the key takeaways from this are, these are some of the softwares that we recommend for specifically for service delivery we were looking at with this project. But what we discovered is that everything, no matter whether you're looking at donor software or service delivery or volunteer management, whatever it happens to be, they all kind of seem to fit into these main categories. So there's big category lines across the top. So you've got the kind of the really big players like Microsoft Dynamics and Salesforce, CV. They can do everything for you, but they are incredibly complex and they require somebody to help you do them. Then you've got your kind of build your own things, which are no code or low code. So, you know, anyone with a kind of relative level of digital competency can pick them up and start working on them. They can be a great place for small charities with not much budget to start if you've got the person who can actually do it, but they do require a level of kind of internal competency to do it. Then you've got the kind of off-the-shelf all-rounders. These, again, I'm afraid are service delivery ones, but there are off-the-shelf all-rounders for all of the other sectors that you might be looking at of your service of your work. And these are just the ones you buy and you kind of start using pretty much straight away. They tend to be, you know, sort of more expensive potentially, but they're already developed, and when they upgrade because somebody else suggests a brilliant new feature, you'll get that too. So you're kind of running with the crowd, which can be quite a nice place to be. And then we've gone into more impact focused ones. I won't go into those because they're kind of too specific for this. And then there's a couple of other places where you can go and find out about other systems. We put some links in so you can go and have a look. There's a lot out there about CRMs, a lot of things about specific areas as well, like under management or donor management. So we'll send it through with the links for you to have a look.
And we're just sharing here, we like to kind of get feedback and follow up with organizations we know that have implemented a system. So we ask them, you know, what advice would you give? What particularly defined the decision that you were making? So these are some of the things that they fed back to us in terms of for their organization and making that decision, what was important. So you'll have that on the slide. You know, if you know you're growing as an organization, scalability is obviously something to look at. So just going to run through the last three steps before we take Q&A. So really the next step is to prepare. So you've made your choice, get everything ready. So it is about doing a data spring clean. You might be needing to migrate data from an old system. It might be that you don't need to migrate all of that. You make a decision about from what point, or you might make a decision we just we don't move anything across and we start from scratch. Then you're going to be doing some customization, working with the provider, and looking at what you can configure yourselves. User materials, so kind of those reference documents are really key. And as we mentioned before about reviewing and implementing work processes. Then you're going to move into a test and train step. So this is, yeah, again, we wouldn't stress enough to really build in as much training as possible. And at the beginning, I think that's often where people have fallen down with the system. The systems is fine, but actually nobody knows how to use it, and there hasn't been a kind of regular process. This is also the period where you're testing, going backwards and forwards with the provider, getting adjustments done, bringing people on board, and then implement. So this is about kind of embedding it within the organization, using it every day, making it mandatory that this is the system that's used. And then there are just a few key things that we've picked out there to keep some attention on. So the quality of the data, booking in these regular reviews, thinking about onboarding new staff, thinking about new projects as well. That's often what we see. There's a new funding for a new project, but it hasn't really been kind of thought through in terms of the system. And yeah, bringing people together in kind of user groups. So this is where we crowdsource some top tips for success. So again, I'm not going to read through all of this, but yeah, this is people reflecting who've already done this. What would they kind of recommend and suggest to somebody just starting out? So really picks up on a lot of what we've talked about already. We've written a blog about the process, so the link is on this slide. If on the right hand side, this is the list of all those templates. So we've got blank templates of everything that we've shown, that you'll feel very welcome to download and use yourselves. And that's it. I think we have to move over to Q&A now. So our contact details are there, our website and Twitter, and actually we'll add our own email contact as well.
Well, lovely. Thank you very much, Alice and Kate, for a very insightful presentation. Obviously, and thank you to all of you for all of the questions you've submitted. The session is being recorded, and we will make the recording and the resources and slides available within the next 10 days. So without further ado, let me dive straight into the first question from Philippa, who's asking about some options for a CRM that brings together service users and donor data, and not just service users. What would you answer to that? Kate, Alice, which one?
Do you want to go, Alice?
Oh, go on then. I think it's a difficult one to get those two together. There are modular systems out there. I guess my question back to you would be, why do you want them all sitting in one place? Or would you be better off with two and link them together?
Mm-hmm. Got you.
Yeah, particularly because they're likely to be different constituents of people. You're less likely to have one person that has both of those hats, whereas for other roles like volunteers or clients or trust, sometimes there's more of a crossover. They're more likely to be separate.
Brilliant, thank you. Katrina is asking, what is the biggest mistake charities make when looking for a new CRM, in your opinion?
Should I go first this time, okay?
I think it's jumping straight to that step 4 and, maybe not doing that prep work, just hearing about a system because somebody else uses it without kind of really drilling into it. The other thing that I would say as well is not factoring in that ongoing training and that ongoing kind of tender loving care. I think we're trying to phrase it, because you've got to keep a focus on the system. If somebody leaves and it was only one person that was driving it forwards, then often we'll find organizations coming to us saying we need a new system, when in fact they don't need a new system. They just need to kind of a bit of possibly a refresh, but really they just need to kind of implement a program of training and slight tweaking.
Got you. Thank you. Chris is asking about the free options. Would you recommend any good free systems that are around and that can be simple to implement?
Yeah, it depends what for. I think the ones we tend to favour in terms of the free are the no code, low code options, things like Airtable or Zoho. They're quite easy to start using. Airtable in particular, it's kind of almost looks like Excel, but with buttons and colours on it. But they allow you to kind of start building your own entry-level databases, and they have templates you can use, and they're free, but you can kind of to step in, but then you can step up if you need more complexity.
Lovely. Thank you, Alice. And along the same line, any recommendation for good cloud-based CRM systems?
So I think most of the ones I think all of the ones that we featured are cloud-based now. So yeah, there are only a couple that I can think of, and that I know organizations are using that aren't cloud-based. So most, yeah, I think it's looking for a cloud-based, and every one that we mentioned on that slide is a cloud-based.
Cloud-based.
Yeah,
absolutely. Hannah is asking whether there are any sort of funding pots available to help charities go digital and implement that CRM step. Do you have any recommendations?
it's a tough one. Sometimes we know of some funders, but it might depend on who your client group is. So I think the Cloth Workers Foundation, there is an opportunity to include digital within your funding bid. We also know if you're a Lloyd's Bank Foundation grantee through their enhanced program. I know that they include so if you want, you could talk to your grant manager. Potentially there might be some funding or some funding to cover a consultant to provide advice and take you through the process, and I think possibly to put towards some of the costs of the system. So those are a couple of things that spring to mind. Alice, I don't know, I know we've been looking at this.
Yeah, I've been looking recently for somebody actually, and there's very little at the moment. There was a huge rush of it during COVID because we were all going online, and now it's all sort of seems to have fallen off a bit, but things come around, so it's worth just googling digital funding or digital transformation funding, and you'll see that things like the National Lottery, they had it in 2018. So there are kind of things that come around on a regular basis, so just keeping your eyes open for them.
My advice would also be not to think just to look for digital funding, because actually this is a system that will underpin how you're working, how you can deliver your project. So it's looking at building in costs. You know, many it will depend on the funder, but there might be a budget line for evaluation, for example. So you could be building in part of the cost of your system that's going to enable you to capture that data to do that. So don't just look for digital funding. Think about how you can build it into your budget lines of any project or service.
And that's one reason to go with kind of the more well-known names as well in the area, because you might find that the funder will be familiar with that. So when you put in your £1,000 or whatever for that system, they won't blink an eyelid because they'll recognise it and know that that's what it costs for that system. So that can be, you know, then it's not unusual for them to see that.
Brilliant, thank you. And Hannah also is asking, obviously they have multiple projects, so should they have one CRM for the organization as a whole and restrict access, or have a different CRM for each project?
I think, yeah, Alice is probably best. This has come up in the latest big piece of work we've done. Yeah.
So I'm a big proponent of having one CRM for everybody, and then putting in permissions so who can see what. I also, though, would really question, and I come across a lot when people say, oh, but so-and-so can't possibly see that data on so-and-so else. And I think as an organisation, you need to be really thinking that through, because, you know, if your staff and your volunteers are signing non-disclosure and they're kind of aware of the ethics of working with personal data, some level of trust is acceptable within that as well. You know, you can't expect your computer system to be completely like a prison locking down data and not giving people any flexibility. So, you know, kind of really look at it before you get crazy with those permissions.
But I think the recent piece of work you did, there would, in the end, it's been two systems, but that can potentially link together. Yeah. So in that instance, it was finding what was best in terms of for the priority and those kind of essentials versus desirables, wasn't it, across the different functions in that team?
No, it depends what you're using it for, and that was a very clear cut, when a bit like with the donor question we had before from, I can't remember who it's from, Philippa maybe, the donor question, if it was two very clear pools of work, so it was social prescribing versus volunteer management and kind of core stuff, and so that social prescribing bit doesn't need to sit with everything else, so it was a very clear kind of line you could cut, you know, so that's makes it easier with two systems sometimes.
Yeah.
Got you. Thank you. Obviously, I'm conscious that we have 2 minutes to two, but we have a few questions that are around the key lessons that have been learned around migrating data from one system to another, or from legacy to new CRM system. What are your tips and guidance around that?
Sometimes providers will offer a service, a paid for service, to do that migration. I know of others where they've also defined a spreadsheet template and said, if you can get all of your data into that template, then, you know, we can import that easily into our system. So I think it's having those conversations early on, finding out what costs and what flexibility there is, but also making that judgment call about how do you really need to migrate all of that data. If you know, if there's going to be a cost or it's going to take too much time. I think another organization actually worked out that they could employ somebody to do some data entry, and that was, you know, that was fine. They built that into their costs. Alice
Yeah.
might have something else to add.
No, I totally agree with you. I think it's where to draw the line. People always want to migrate, decades worth of data, and it's not worth it. When do you actually go back and look at that? And should you be storing it anyway? It's a good moment to look back at what you're actually got, and should you really have it anyway, in terms of consent.
Got you. Thank you. And a very last question from David. If the charity is made up entirely of volunteers, how do you ensure project team engagement, and how do you make sure that people are still there when the project progresses? Tough one.
It's a tough one.
It's definitely inviting them to participate. Obviously, you're not going to get everybody, but then maybe not just going for the people that are keen and eager to do that. Also find a group of people where you feel, whether it is they're less tech savvy or them, so that you're not just building something according to the people that are most ready to move to a system. Because ultimately, if you need those volunteers to be using the system and adding data into it, you definitely need to be involving them in the testing phase as well, I would say. Yeah.
I would echo all of that. It's involvement in every step.
And I know it's hard, but defining that that's part of the volunteering role, that you're doing this volunteering, but there's also you're also expected to be logging that work or whatever, so that it's clear, I think.
As a responsibility, and
it's
part of your responsibilities. But great. Well, this is all we've had time for today. We've had over 40 questions, so we will share these with you, Kate and Alice, and hopefully you'll be able to provide all the answers in your course. Sorry, this is added work for you, but from what we've seen, it was a very interesting subject, and a lot of very interesting questions. Sorry, we haven't been able to answer all of them now, but we will in time for the recording. So thank you very much once again, Alice and Kate, for your time today, and thank you all for joining us. We hope you found the presentation insightful and full of good takeaways. Once you leave Zoom, you'll be asked to share some feedback for us. So if you could take 2 minutes of your time as an attendee to complete the feedback, that'd be great. And before we leave, obviously, I'd like to mention that our upcoming webinar on April the 8th will be on creating winning and donation-worthy content using Adobe Spark. So if you're curious about Adobe Spark, please sign up. So yeah, like I said, we will make sure to answer all of the questions within and as part of the recording for next week. And once again, thank you, Alice and Kate. I hope you have a good rest of the week. Thank you all, and see you again very soon.
Okay.
Thanks
Bye,
so much,
everyone.
Lisa. Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Goodbye.